Welcome back to another edition of Irish Illustrated Spotlight. I'm Tim O'Malley by Tim Prister, senior editor and owner of Irish Illustrated. And Tim, after 3 weeks of off-the-field news in which I worked here at Spotlight with John Bryce, we're going on the field for what I think 95% of our consumers enjoy, which is an initial preview of Notre Dame's opponents, and 5% wonder why in the world you would talk about opponents since Notre Dame has not lost since 1985 in Jerry Faust's first game. But you're nine opponents in. We're going to focus on the first four, try to break this up into 3 segments so we can digest it. And obviously the first 4 games highlighted by Texas A&M, but you brought up something I thought most people probably haven't thought about. Other than Purdue, 3 of the first 4 opponents are known for their defense. And I thought of something today when I was looking at it. Notre Dame plays 3 road games this year. 2 of them are in the first 3 weeks, and we're going to discuss those. 3 true road games. We're going to discuss those today.
Yeah, and I think, it'll be an interesting matchup for Notre Dame's offense because, the offensive line, where are they with that group as the season begins at Texas A&M? You have a new quarterback. You're breaking in all these receivers. So it'll be interesting. But, yeah, I think as we break it down in thirds here, going through the first third of the schedule, it's defense. Texas A&M was 14th in the country against the run. I mean, I can go through these stats. I won't bore everybody with the stats. 8th in sacks. And I realize that there's attrition, but attrition is different in college football today.
Yeah.
Used to be. It's a lot easier to replenish, as we're going to find out when we go further into it, certainly as it applies to A&M, because they had like 2 dozen leave and 2 dozen come in or somewhere around there. And then, the transfer portal, the ability to just replenish. We'll see that with Louisville, Florida State. Louisville brought in 30. Only Colorado had more.
They always will.
Players than Louisville. But I'm getting ahead of the game here a little bit. Northern Illinois, number 6 in the country in passing yards defensively, number 13 in yards per attempt, number 26 in scoring defense. Purdue has a little bit give there, but yet they were one of 52 teams that held opponents to under 4 yards per carry. They lost Nick Scorton. The good news is that Notre Dame doesn't have to face Nick Scorton when they play Purdue, the defensive end who led the Big Ten in sacks. The bad news is he transferred A&M.
Yeah.
It'll be the first opponent they see, but probably the best defense of the first 4 teams is Chuck Martin's at Miami of Ohio. They were number 9 in third down last year, number 6 in red zone touchdown defense. Only allowed like 17 points per game. So, and again, I realize that's not against the greatest of competition, but they're formidable. And right off the bat, Mike Denbrock's offense will be challenged.
Well, beginning with A&M, you called it a turnstile roster because I believe they have 31 people enter the portal, 28 come in. Scorton is one of them. He's the highlight, and he joins a strong defense. I'm going to get to this obscenely wrong over-under in the next 5 minutes of the Notre Dame-Texas A&M game. But that's why Vegas has big buildings, because I find this over-under absolutely ridiculous of 48.5 when Notre Dame and A&M square off in week 1. But it's going to be Mike Elko's defense. Jay Bateman is going to be coordinating that. We're going to get to that in a second, because if you've been following Tim Prister at Irish Illustrated, you know how he has broken down Jay Bateman's defenses at North Carolina. And Colin Klein, the offensive coordinator. So really A&M with 31 additions, 28 defections. Now Connor Wigman is back at quarterback, but it is imagine preparing for this if you're Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame, who have the most intact defense returning. They know they can hang their hat on that. Every aspect of Texas A&M is different, from culture of Mike Elko on down. But as you wrote in this series, and it's called Facts, Figures, and Futures for people that want to read at irishillustrated.com, Mike Elko will be tougher to beat in week 11, in week 12, in year 2 and year 3 than he is in game 1, but you do not know what you're going to get other than a heck of an effort if you're Notre Dame out of Elko's team.
No, you really don't. The interesting thing is, we're very familiar with Mike Elko. We're very familiar with Colin Klein, who at one point I was hoping would be the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame because I like the film of Kansas State. And then Jay Bateman, I that's a perplexing here by Mike Elko. I'm really, really surprised at that. The flip side of that is you have Mike Elko as the head coach to perhaps, correct or direct the Texas A&M defense in the right way. But I hated watching Jay Bateman's defenses at North Carolina because there seemed like constant confusion. their secondary spent more time pointing fingers at each other when there was a breakdown than they were actually, locking into their coverages and their schemes. So yeah, Texas A&M is, but they brought in a ton of talent. We know what the Mike Elko influence is going to be like. Connor Wigman is interesting back in the saddle at quarterback after suffering a season-ending injury, a foot injury in the fourth game. They really like him. He's a guy that really sparks them. So having him back is significant. They went 4-5 without him in the lineup. But here's the thing, and we have a tendency when we all of us focus, Notre Dame fans and everybody, we're so focused on what Notre Dame does, and everybody else is pretty much scores, in records. Texas A&M was 4-5 without Wigman in the starting lineup, so they were effective when he was there. But it was early in the year, and the schedule wasn't very difficult. But they lost at home to Alabama by 6. They lost to a good Tennessee team on the road by 7. They lost at Mississippi by 3. Lost to LSU at LSU by a dozen. So they weren't far off, but it was a program in turmoil with Jimbo Fisher and everything that was going wrong there. So I'm not sure that this program is as far off as everybody thinks, because you just look at records and some scores and you figure that tells you the whole story. But now you insert Mike Elko and the discipline that he's going to bring to this program, and then 103,000 fans at Kyle Field. Someone said on our message board, was talking about, well, the Clemson crowd will be as loud as this past year would be as loud as what Texas A&M will be. Well, there's 23,000 more fans at Kyle Field, so that adds an interesting dynamic.
Well, there's 8 more hours of lubrication for A&M fans as well. It's the night game. Obviously, we knew was coming. I think it's honestly part of the reason the night game. Mike Elko, what A&M has on the defensive front and what Notre Dame has on the offensive line. I'm going to get to that because we have a question. It's part of the reason that A&M is favored by 1.5. If Notre Dame has a question mark, they lost Joe Alt and Blake Fisher, replacing him with 2 tackles. That Charles Jagasa one day is going to be a heck of an offensive lineman. They have to have that start on August 31st. Tosh Baker could be. He was a top 100 recruit, but he's in year 5. He has to prove it. We like the guards and center. I think nationally speaking, the guards and centers don't resonate with people that are trying to handicap this game. That's part of it. But as you mentioned, a 3-1 team with Wigman, 6-1 at home. Is the defensive line, though, adding Skorton, and as you called it, the Shamar line, because they somehow have Shamar Turner and Shamar Stewart up front. If you talk to Texas A&M reporters and media, they love the defensive line at A&M. They like the defensive front 7. They love the defensive line. And I've been on a couple shows down there where I explained to them, like, Notre Dame's defensive front is going to be fantastic. The secondary could be better. And Notre Dame's apparent weakness is the offensive line. So it's going against A&M's strength. And that really, 2 months removed before we see training camp, is the story for the game right now for me.
Right now, I think Texas A&M's offensive line is really going to struggle against Notre Dame's defensive line, which is your point about, what'd you say, 49.5. I mean, that as we sit here right now, many months in advance and maybe some injuries in preseason, who knows, it sure looks like a low-scoring game. But yeah, that the Shamar line, Turner and Stewart and Skorton, you add to that group. And they had a freshman linebacker last year, Torian York, who's very good. And remember the name Solomon DeShields, the linebacker from Pittsburgh. He's now at Texas A&M. So yeah, this, especially in the first game of the year, you can see the offense is spinning their wheels a little bit. Mike Denbrock will have something a little bit more aggressive than what we're accustomed to with 11 personnel, but you just don't know about that offensive line, specifically the offensive tackles. I agree with you, Tim. I think Notre Dame's interior offensive line has a chance to be really good. It'll be interesting to see how the competition works with Coogan going against Spindler. We both kind of feel like Spindler is going to end up getting the edge there. Billy Schrouth should be ready to really excel now and start to reach his full potential. And Ashton Craig has a chance to be a really good center. But it's down to the tackles, and it'll be very interesting to see that competition at the two tackle spots in August.
Because we have a question on it. It says from Irish Mike, thoughts on O-line starters. When we both say we feel Spindler's going to win the job over Coogan, we just feel Spindler is going to win the job over Coogan. He finished really strong. I think Rocco Spindler working his way back from injury, where 3 months ago we might have had him buried because he was injured going into spring and he had to take on an incumbent starter in Coogan and Schroth, who we all think is going to become a top tier guard in the future, if not this season. The Spindler rise is not something people should be surprised by. It's if he would have followed the path of Blake Fisher and Joe Alt, that would have been surprising. People wanted Rocco Spindler to start as a freshman guard. He wasn't ready. He was barely ready as a junior guard. We just kind of feel that he has kind of moved into that role now. And no matter who wins that, 3 guards are going to play a significant role this year.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, heck, when Spindler was an early entry freshman, we were talking about him potentially being a starter because he did get some first team reps, and then the game and the competition and the opponents caught up to him a little bit. But I think overall he just offers a little bit more. Coogan was the only guy that started all 13 games on the offensive line last year. Of course, he had a couple opt-outs for the bowl game. He would have had the 2 tackles would have started 13 games as well. But I mean, I thought and I've defended Coogan. I thought that he played pretty consistent football throughout the season. What happens is we remember the bad plays, and he wasn't great in pass protection. But then neither was Spindler a lot of times either. So, but I think they've come a long way, and I think they're trending towards the interior offensive line being a strength of this team.
Final note on A&M, and I want to pull it straight from your story, facts, figures, and futures. The Aggies were 82nd in red zone touchdown percentage last year, attempting 35 field goals by Randy Bond. The next time Notre Dame attempts 35 field goals, we are going to have a lot of discussions on the message board about the offensive coordinator. I bring that up because Al Golden's red zone defense is going to hit the ground running this year, bringing back that many starters. And honestly, a rugged group up front. And I think that is one of the reasons where I don't bet for people, Tim Prister, but I do believe this is a lower scoring game. I think the Texas A&M defensive front will have success, and I think Notre Dame's entire defensive unit will have success.
We're going to see a lot of Randy Bond, and some of it will maybe from long distance because he was 5 of 6 from 50 yards and beyond. So yeah, I would agree. It's going to be a wrestling match, I think, for at least early on in that game.
Next opponent is Northern Illinois. That's the home opener. They were 7-6 last year, winning a bowl game over Appalachian State, which makes it an accomplishment because Appalachian State was a quality team last year. Now, you pointed out it was their first bowl win since 2011, but I'm wondering if Northern Illinois would like to go back to the days where they were losing Orange Bowls to Florida State, because that was a quality time for Northern Illinois' football program, led by Thomas Hammock right now. It's the first meeting with Notre Dame, and I think it's relevant because, Tim, when you wrote this story, there was actually a fair amount of responses to it. There's a lot of NIU fans on our board. I don't know if you recall that from when they were responding. There's a lot of Northern Illinois graduates on the Irish Illustrated message board.
Yeah, I don't recall that. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, I think a lot of, if you're a Northern Illinois football fan, when you went to college there, you were probably a Notre Dame football fan. That's the way it works. It's like those traders from 1980 in Notre Dame basketball and IU.
Yeah, but head coach Thomas Hammock will be going into his 6th year at Northern Illinois, and it's a little bit of a crossroads. He's kind of alternated success and in some struggles. They were 9-5 in 2021, as you said, 7-6, and then 5-3. They did beat Boston College in overtime at Boston College, which, we know Boston College isn't a great program, but when anytime a MAC team goes on the road with an ACC team and comes away with a win, it's pretty impressive. But their biggest problem is, as it appears right now, is who's going to be the trigger man for them. Rocky Lombardi, the quarterback that came over from Michigan State, was by no means a great player for Northern Illinois, but he offered stability to the position and a little bit of savvy, having played in the Big Ten with Michigan State. So their biggest question mark is who's going to replace him, or I should say how effectively Ethan Hampton will be as his replacement. I think he's really going to struggle against Notre Dame's defensive front. Their offensive line will have their hands full against Notre Dame's defensive front. But again, defensively, they can do some things. 26 in the country in scoring defense. Opponents only averaged 320 yards total offense per game. That was 23rd And they were one of on the offensive side of the ball, they were one of 22 teams to average at least 5 yards per carry. But when all is said and done, they do have 16 starters coming back.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you that. 16 starters back sounds great, but the whole secondary's back. I mean, that's relevant too when you have to go on the road and play a Notre Dame. Last year, the past 2 seasons, if a team had its whole secondary back, Tim, and you were trying to break down the passing game with Tyler Buckner versus an entire secondary, and we would have liked Sam Hartman early in the year against an entire secondary, but that matters a little bit going on the road that you have 4 veterans coming back on the secondary for that home opener.
It does, and they have a very good, by MAC standards, they have a very good defensive line. Rasheem Thomas is somebody that, you and I were talking about before we hit record here or going live. 74, a defensive end leading the defense in tackles. I mean, that just. Can you think of another time when that happened?
No, it makes me think of why is he still there in the portal era? Because that could happen. I compared him on film to Tennessee State's Terrell Allen, who was so good against Blake Fisher last year. The national broadcasters that watched Notre Dame film to prepare for later games were asking Notre Dame if Blake Fisher was hurt because of what Terrell Allen did. And Blake Fisher was not hurt. Terrell Allen entered the transfer portal. But yeah, a defensive end leading in tackles. Obviously, we think of the days of Trevor Laws leading Notre Dame in tackles, but remember, that was a 3-9 bad defense. So that was part of it.
Yeah, it was. And it was some 3-man front there too. But I mean, attrition, it's really pretty incredible that Northern Illinois was not picked apart by transfers. So, I mean, that right there says something about Thomas Hammock. It may say something about their NIL that we don't know about in the Mid-American Conference, but yeah, they come back with a ton of experience. Some power forward, the power forward did not gut them like really happens with. Wouldn't you hate to be I think coaches even more so now are going to be hesitant to take, like a MAC conference head coaching job because it's so difficult to keep your personnel. Yeah. Somehow Thomas Hammock and Northern Illinois were able to do that.
Well, just before we leave Northern Illinois, remember that I think Toledo was a better team than Northern Illinois going into the 2021 season. Toledo gave Notre Dame and its new offensive line a lot of fits. Marshall came in a year later and obviously gave Notre Dame all they could handle, including the victory. I don't think Northern Illinois is necessarily along those lines, but you're also not playing Tennessee State in the home opener this year. It's not South Florida like week 2 in 2020. I do think Northern Illinois has a little bit of punch going into the game.
Yeah, I think so too. And a guy that I'm going to mention now, nobody will remember, but when we preview Northern Illinois, it'll be brought up again. Trayvon Rudolph had 51 catches for them, 114 in his career, and he's had a 100-yard kick return in the past in 2021 against Bowling Green. Long returns of 56 yards as a freshman and 48 yards last year. So they've got a bit of a game breaker there at wide receiver.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot because that will be in your first rate series where you rate Notre Dame's talent at every position, including coach and schedule, versus their 12 upcoming opponents. Do you think Notre Dame will be number 1 this year?
At wide receiver?
No, in first rate.
Oh, in first rate, like overall?
Yeah. I mean, there's only 4 options against them, so there has to be.
In fact, I was thinking about that the other day as I start to wrap up this series of stories that, wow, Notre Dame's probably going to be number 1. And we don't I don't go into this with any idea how all those, what we do is, and it's pretty inexact, but
because they could not have been in just number 1 in talent across the board. They would not have been in 19 with Georgia, 20 with Clemson. They might have been in 21 going into that 21 season with Cincinnati and Wisconsin and USC maybe being but usually I don't think they're number 1 overall in talent and obviously not in 22 or 23 with Ohio State.
I think this is the 14th year I've been doing that, and I don't
thought more. It's a fun series. I enjoy it. Yes.
Yes, and it's at the end.
Causes arguments too, which is good on the board. So
at the end of the day, it's fairly meaningless because you take Notre Dame's 12 opponents, their quarterback situations, and Notre Dame's quarterback situation. So you have 13. You rate them 1 through 13. It's very inexact. I add up the numbers. There's no rhyme or reason to the statistical angle that I take. That's up for Tom Zwiller to decide for force, which he will. But no, it's fun, and and all of a sudden, you're rating offensive line. It's like, holy cow, this team, You don't expect this offensive line to be in the top 5 with this group, but it does. So yeah, we'll be starting that here fairly soon.
As relevant as you say it might be, Marshall's defensive secondary was very high that year, and it turns out they mattered a little bit in that game. So,
we read their defensive line high too, and it played out that way.
Game number 3 is actually game number 2 of 3 true road games at Purdue. I was concerned this was the trap game because I've seen what happens at Ross-Ade Stadium at night. It is a day game that mitigates it a little bit, but obviously Purdue can rise up at home. It's also that one-way rivalry issue going on right now for Purdue fans and Notre Dame fans. This is, as you pointed out, I mean, they played every year for 68 years and then all of a sudden stopped because of the ACC scheduling. The return of the series in 21 was so memorable that I forgot about it when I was trying to write the series. I forgot that they actually played with Jack Plummer in back in 2021. But this year at Purdue, Ryan Walters replacing Jeff Brom, and the loss of Jeff Brom, I think, is going to have an impact on Purdue's program. And I hate to say it this way, but maybe until they have the next coach coming in.
Well, I think it already did, considering they were 100th and third down offense, and they were not good. They were not good offensively.
Walters is a defensive coach from Missouri, but no, you could still be a little better than.
I don't know if everybody remembers, but their quarterback, and there appeared to be some interest from Notre Dame at the time when they started looking for a transfer quarterback. But Hudson Card from Texas is their quarterback. He struggled last year. They were 85th in scoring, 84th in passing, 98th. Well, that's scoring defense, 98th in scoring defense. He struggled. I mean, he completed like 59% of his passes, which is okay, but 15 touchdown passes, 8 interceptions, just 6.5 yards per attempt, which is pretty slim. They struggled offensively, and so the impact of losing Jeff Brom was felt last year and will still be felt this year.
And the average margin of defeat last year in 8 games, I think, is relevant. It was almost 20 points. They lost, as we said, Nick Scorton, who was the Big Ten's best pass rusher last year, to A&M. Deion Burks, slot receiver, went to Oklahoma. Looking at your list, you had 6 guys either drafted or free agency from Purdue last year from the 4-8 team. I think the one-sided losses is probably something that's what puts you on high alert going into year 2. You can't have that many one-sided losses if you're the Boilermakers this year.
Lost by 15 to Syracuse, 21 to Wisconsin, 34 to Ohio State, 17 Nebraska, 28 at Michigan. They did play Iowa tough, but Iowa makes games close with their lack of offense. They lost that game by 6. The Northwestern, it was an 8 game. They just really, really struggle offensively, and I don't see a whole lot here that indicates that there's going to be a significant uptick in what they did offensively last year.
3 Georgia players in the portal. That's an interesting move for Purdue, although if they're coveted Georgia players, they are probably not going to Purdue as the number 1 choice there, but it doesn't hurt. They need more talent, and that's Georgia had talent to spare to offer Purdue. That's what it comes down to. I think I had pegged that as a trap game. Purdue's roster, I think, is in trouble in terms of matching up with Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's defense in that game. Every time we talk about this opening season, I'm trying to figure out which game's going to go over, because Texas A&M, Northern Illinois, and Purdue seem like they're going under, and our 4th and final in the series is the best defense of all 4 of them, maybe from last year, right? I know they didn't bring it all back, but Miami of Ohio at 11-3, and as we like to say, friend of the show, Chuck Martin.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Before, I just want to throw one more thing in about Purdue, because this guy is a sensational player. Dylan Thieneman, the safety, as a freshman last year, 106 tackles, 6 interceptions, freshman of the year honors from Football Writers Association of America. Really, with length.
See, more unders.
He may not. He's certainly good enough to move on from Purdue before he runs out of eligibility. But yeah, Miami of Ohio, they won 11 games last year. They lost a tough bowl game. Chuck Martin returns a really, really good defense. And in their mind, the fact that 6-year quarterback Brett Gabbert is back, they've had a lot of success with him. It's not necessarily reflected in his numbers, and it's certainly not reflected in his stature. His brother Blaine Gabbert, who was a number 10 overall pick in the NFL draft, was is 6'5", and his younger brother is 6 foot. So he doesn't benefit from the stature that he had, but Miami of Ohio feels better when Brett Gabbert is on the field for them.
14 starters back. They did get hit a little bit by the transfer portal because when you're that good as a top tier mid-major, other teams are going to come calling, including Alabama taking their all-star kicker, which just doesn't seem fair when that's going to happen. If your Alabama's going to go poaching Miami of Ohio kickers from Chuck Martin. Chuck once said when he came to South Bend in 2017 for what was a 52-17 Notre Dame win, I believe. Gus Ragland was the quarterback, matriculated to Notre Dame as a grad assistant thereafter. Chuck Martin said, it's like at recess and they have the first 85 picks. I don't know if Notre Dame has the first 85 picks in this game, but there still is going to be a bit of the talent disparity because they were hit in the offseason.
Yeah, well, and they lost Gage Laverdane, a wide receiver, to South Carolina. They lost a running back, Rashad Amos, to Mississippi State. They can't afford those kind of losses. That's why I say when I talk about the MAC, usually they get picked apart. Miami of Ohio didn't get picked apart. Just a couple of players that we're talking about here, but that hurts, and that hurts their overall defense. But defense is definitely their calling card. They were one of 20 defenses in the country to hold teams to under 5 yards per snap. As you said, Oklahoma came in and got Woolard, their defensive end. And then they also lost their defensive back, Michael Dowell, to the NFL, and he was a good player too. So, I do not anticipate the kind of game that transpired the last time Miami of Ohio was here. I think their defense is better than that. But we'll see, because they're going to have a hard time scoring against it.
Yes.
We're going to say this just about every game. They're going to have a very difficult time scoring points against Notre Dame's defense.
They really are, but I'm glad you brought up the talent drain, because this is my favorite part of this. Things like this, if people hone in on the series, facts, figures, and futures, the talent drain, if I don't say the names, because a lot of casual fans, well, most football fans aren't going to know the names of Miami of Ohio, but the talent drain lists 5 places where these 5 best players or 5 top players were lost to. They were the Bengals, Alabama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Mississippi State. If you put that together, they got picked over by some of the top talents you could find. And I think that's crucial. But they do bring back 14 starters. They will play good defense against Notre Dame. I don't know if it's a trap. I don't think it's a trap game. Maybe home game number 2 with Louisville's coming up afterwards. If Notre Dame fans and Notre Dame players have the correct memory, they will remember what happened to them last time they played Louisville. So I suppose there's a look ahead situation in there.
Yeah, I'm 9 games into this. I'm getting ahead of schedule here a little bit, but I think Georgia Tech is the trap game. That's not a true road game.
Right.
That certainly helps Notre Dame. But as it relates to Miami of Ohio, number 14 in rushing touchdowns allowed, number 6 in red zone touchdown percentage. When we talk about red zone, we don't talk about just regular percentage. We talk about touchdown percentage. That was something Charlie Weiss pounded into our heads. It's not.
No, you can kick all the field goals you want. It's a win.
All field goals in the red zone are fantastic. But that red zone touchdown percentage defense. But, you talked about the talent drain, Tim, 2 on offense, 2 on defense, and of course, their kicker.
I want to bring this up because I think it ties into the Miami linebackers. ND has concerns at a few positions, says DL Kyle 01. Outside of the A&M defensive line, are there any position groups that ND will disadvantage? Now, he might mean only the A&M game, but if you look at Miami's returning linebackers, which was MAC Defensive Player of the Year, Matt Salopek, and inside linebacker teammate Ty Wise, 144 and 122 tackles last year. It's like they were putting a time machine and went back to play in 1982 and were stopping running offenses the entire time.
I think we're going to find when we get into the first-rate series that there are multiple poor linebacking cores, or unproven linebacking cores on Notre Dame's schedule. This is not one. This is this is a really good group. It hurts to lose, guys like Woolard and who's the other one? The Michael Dowell that I mentioned, the free agent that went to the Bengals.
Right.
But this is a good linebacker core. This will be one of the better linebacker cores that Notre Dame will face this year.
And for Irish fans listening, Woolard went to Oklahoma of his 41 tackles, 12 were lost, 9.5 sacks. That's a hit for Chuck Martin, because he's in his 11th season. Is that right?
11 seasons. Yeah, he's really settled in there. I want to go see him this summer because it's such a hoot to visit with him.
Yes.
Number one. But yeah, I mean, I think I went down to see him. That would be the third time that I visited him. So obviously it was much earlier in his career at Miami, Ohio. And he just settled in, I don't know how many other opportunities there have been. I don't think that he's the kind of guy that's necessarily, always looking to see where the grass is greener. It's where his feet are at the time. And he's done a good job. I think there have been some seasons there where we have kind of expected them to be a little bit more consistent. Mm-hmm. But again, as now you get into the transfer portal area, it's very difficult for a MAC team to remain consistent because they generally get picked clean.
And I messed up. Four thoughts on Chuck Martin, but first I have to correct myself. It was Miami, Ohio that played Appalachian State in the bowl game. After going through, they fought their way to get Appalachian State in the bowl game. I said it was Arkansas State that Northern Illinois played. That would have been a heck of a game for Arkansas State, or for Northern Illinois to win against Appalachian State. But 4 Chuck Martin points before we end this segment and kind of tease the second one, which I think we'll do next week, probably, right? You're through 9. We might as well do segment 2, games 5 through 8. Chuck Martin, a couple of stories. Used to run through my cul-de-sac. I always see Chuck Martin sprinting through the cul-de-sac at full speed. I guess he was doing circuit training. Harrison Smith, one of the greatest players in Notre Dame history, said of Chuck Martin, the second he talked to me, he had my full attention. I knew he knew everything he was talking about. That was as a defensive backs coach. 1 year later, he was Notre Dame's offensive coordinator. So that portends to head coaching ability. Chuck Martin, of course, the top 85 picks is my favorite thing I've ever heard a coach say going into a game. He did say, if the Chicago Bears ask him to come coach, he will leave tomorrow, on an interview last year, which I thought was great because, as you know, he grew up an all-time Notre Dame and Chicago sports fan.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you go talk to Chuck Martin this year, I would just turn your recorder on and send it to Noah the intern, spare Tom, because you do not want to transcribe whatever conversation you have.
I was going to bring that up, Tim. That was the one thing. We love Chuck Martin. Hope you stay. But for those of us in business, there's a lot of transcribing of interviews, and Chuck Martin takes forever because he fits in so many words, way more words per minute than any coach I think we've ever dealt with.
Yes. That's it for this edition of Irish Illustrated Spotlight. Thanks to Tim Prister for previewing his Facts, Figures, and Future series. Tim will get back next week, I believe Wednesday or Thursday, so we can go through, I believe it's Louisville, Stanford, Georgia Tech, your trap game, and also Navy in segment 2. Until then, everyone, thanks for watching.